Welcome. Today, we have an incredible story about how a simple act of kindness transforms into an unexpected journey full of dilemmas and twists. Just imagine, you help someone on the road, and suddenly, you're caught up in the secrets of one of the country's most powerful families. What would you do? Don't miss this and other thrilling content. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. And go ahead and comment where you're watching from. We want to see how far this story reaches. What would happen if a single act of kindness transformed not just one person's life, but an entire community? Jake Turner, a humble man with a generous heart, embodies kindness in Riverwood and Ohio. Known for always lending a hand to his neighbors, he lives a simple routine, deeply connected to his community. However, one ordinary night as he returns home from work, his life changes forever when he encounters Emily Warren, an elegant and distressed young woman, standing by the roadside with a flat tire. Without hesitation, Jake decides to help her, unaware that this small gesture will trigger a series of events that will alter his destiny. After this unexpected interaction, a mysterious black SUV appears in front of Jake's house the following morning. Two enigmatic men from the influential Whitmore family introduce themselves and reveal that Emily is the daughter of a powerful magnate. They offer Jake a reward in gratitude for his help, a proposal that could financially transform his life. However, Jake soon realizes that the SUV is following him, and a sequence of strange and suspicious events begins to make him question the true intentions of the Whitmore family. The tension escalates when Emily returns, revealing that she was fleeing from dangerous enemies connected to her family's power, placing Jake in a moral dilemma: accept the reward and change his life, or use this opportunity to promote lasting transformations in Riverwood. Motivated by the desire to benefit his community, Jake decides to accept the offer, but with a crucial condition: that the resources be invested in building a community center and scholarship programs for the town's youth. Throughout this journey, he faces immense challenges, being tempted to use the Whitmore's power for personal gain, as well as dealing with corrupt political figures trying to manipulate his project. Amid all this, Jake remains true to his values, resisting pressures and earning the respect of everyone around him. Riverwood transforms into a symbol of renewal, and Jake emerges as a source of inspiration, proving that even in the face of power and danger, it is possible to do good and preserve integrity. With each twist, the story leads the audience to question what it truly means to have power and remain ethical while engaging in a narrative of suspense and emotion, culminating in an inspiring and touching conclusion. Life in Riverwood was peaceful, but Jake knew that the shadows of the past loomed over his future. Since he was a child, he had dreamed of making a difference in the lives of those around him. Growing up in a humble family, Jake learned the value of solidarity early on. His father, a local mechanic, often helped neighbors without asking for anything in return, and his mother, a teacher, always encouraged young people to pursue education as a pathway to a better future. These lessons shaped Jake, and he always strived to be a pillar of support for his community. That night, when he stopped to help Emily, Jake did not just fix a tire. He began to open a door to a world he had never imagined. The young woman, though elegant, displayed a vulnerability that touched his heart. During their brief conversation while changing the tire, Jake realized that Emily's life was far from perfect. She mentioned, with a distant look, that she was running away from something that haunted her, but she didn't elaborate. This interaction, though short, awakened in Jake a desire to protect and help not only Emily, but everyone who might be facing invisible battles. When the Whitmore family men appeared, Jake was unprepared for the avalanche of changes that would follow. The tempting offer of a reward tested his deepest values. He found himself in internal conflict. How could he accept this help without compromising his integrity? His mother's words echoed in his mind. The true worth of a person is measured by their actions when no one is watching. This reflection would become crucial as the challenges intensified. As the community around him began to notice the changes, such as the presence of the mysterious SUV and the Whitmore's behavior, Jake found himself surrounded by distrust and fear. The town, which had always been a welcoming place, now seemed to be transforming into a battleground between good and evil. He often spoke with his friends, like Tom, the owner of the local diner, who always supported him, and Sarah, a young mother eager for better opportunities for her children. These interactions not only solidified Jake's character, but also reinforced his desire to fight for a better Riverwood. With each passing day, Jake became more aware that his decision to accept the Whitmores' offer was not just about money or power, but how he could use this chance to help those who needed it most. He dreamed of seeing a community center flourish, where children could play and learn, and young people could find opportunities he himself had never had. This vision grew stronger as he faced external pressures and temptations to use his new status for personal gain. As he dealt with the challenges that arose, Jake also encountered moments of introspection. He constantly questioned himself, what does it really mean to have power? And, am I willing to sacrifice my integrity for personal success? These questions accompanied him day and night, becoming a reflection of his internal struggle. His relationship with Emily, in turn, began to deepen. What started as a simple act of help transformed into an unexpected friendship. Emily, in turn, became a source of strength and support for Jake, revealing her own vulnerabilities and the challenges she faced growing up under the shadow of a powerful father. Together, they explored what it meant to have courage and face adversities. And this friendship not only shaped Jake's decisions, but also brought a new perspective to his own struggles. The story, with its twists and challenges, revealed the true essence of what it means to be human. In his journey, Jake not only fought against external forces but also battled his own inner demons. And so, the plot unfolded, challenging the reader to reflect on the true nature of power, kindness, and what it means to fight for the greater good amid chaos. Jake Turner's life in Riverwood had always been marked by a comforting simplicity. He knew everyone by name and cared for each one of them. However, after helping Emily Warren, everything began to change. The visit from the Whitmore family, with their offer of rewards, brought not only opportunities but also a whirlwind of uncertainties. The first night after the visit was filled with insomnia. Jake tossed and turned in his bed, contemplating the implications of accepting the money. He knew the community relied on him, but he also felt the growing pressure that the offer represented. The next day, while having coffee at Tom's diner, his mind was distant. Tom, ever observant, noticed the restlessness on his friend's face. "Hey, Jake, are you okay? You look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders," he asked while wiping down a nearby table. "It's just a tough day, Tom. Things are happening, changes," Jake replied, trying to mask what truly troubled him. Tom, who had always been a loyal friend, wasn't satisfied with a vague answer. "Look, if you need someone to talk to, I'm here. You know you can always count on me, right?" The offer of help made Jake feel a wave of gratitude, but also a heavier weight on his conscience. He didn't want his friends to worry about him, but the truth was that the pressure to choose the right path was becoming overwhelming. Meanwhile, Sarah, a young mother who had always admired Jake's kindness, approached his table. "Hi, Jake. I heard rumors about the Whitmore family and that you're involved with them. You're not going to let them lead you astray, are you?" Her voice was filled with concern. "The town needs you, and anything that looks like power can be dangerous." Jake looked at Sarah, feeling the sincerity in her words. He knew she was right, but the idea of power and influence was seductive. "I just want to do what's right, Sarah. Help our community," he replied, trying to sound firm, but the doubt in his voice was unmistakable. That afternoon, Jake decided to meet Emily again. He needed to understand more about her and the situation she was in. When they met in a park near downtown, the tension was palpable. "Jake, I can't stay here for long," Emily said, her nervous gaze darting around. "In fact, I shouldn't have gotten involved with you. I don't want you to get hurt because of me." Her words hit Jake like an arrow. He was drawn to her, but also increasingly worried about what this connection could mean. "Emily, I'm not afraid. I want to help. You don't have to face this alone," Jake replied, his voice firmer now. But as he spoke, a growing fear settled in his chest. He had no idea what he was truly up against. What he did know was that the presence of the Whitmores was becoming a shadow over his life, affecting not only his own feelings but also his relationships with friends and family. The interaction with the Whitmores intensified, and Jake began to realize that they were not just a source of resources but also a force that could manipulate the town. During a meeting at an upscale restaurant in town, a concrete proposal was presented. Jake could receive substantial funding for the community center, but in exchange, he would have to make some concessions that made him uncomfortable. "You must understand that in order for us to succeed, we need control. The town needs strong leadership," one of the men said, his penetrating gaze fixed on Jake. He felt a lump in his throat. The last thing he wanted was to sacrifice his integrity. As the days went by, the pressure mounted. He received anonymous messages, some even threatening, warning him about the risks of getting involved with the Whitmores. The fear of losing everything he had built, the trust of his friends, and the hope for a better future for Riverwood weighed heavily on his shoulders. He began to question whether he truly had what it took to lead this transformation. One night, after a long day of meetings and negotiations, Jake sat on his porch, gazing at the stars. A cool breeze rustled the leaves of the trees, and he felt a connection to his childhood, to the days when he dreamed of changing the world. But now, reality was harsh. He realized that despite his good intentions, he was losing the essence of what he had always believed. "I'm just one step away from becoming what I've always criticized," he thought, distressed. The next day, Jake met again with Tom and Sarah. He needed to vent, needed support. "I'm starting to doubt all of this. What do I really want? Who am I really?" he confessed, his voice trembling with emotion. Tom looked at him, his expression serious. "Jake, you've always been the light of our community. Don't let the lure of power overshadow that. True leadership comes from the heart, and you know that better than anyone." Sarah added, "You have the chance to do something incredible, but don't forget who you are. Remember your roots. You can always start over, but you don't have to lose yourself along the way." Their words resonated with Jake, but at the same time, doubt continued to haunt him. He felt as if he were at a crossroads, where each choice could lead to unexpected consequences. As tensions rose, Jake realized he could no longer ignore his limitations. He wasn't a superhero, and the idea of carrying the weight of Riverwood on his shoulders was overwhelming. He needed a plan, a purpose to guide him. But the external pressure and internal insecurity left him paralyzed. The true battle was just beginning, and Jake knew that it would take more than good intentions to face the challenges ahead. Jake was in a state of constant agitation. The pressure he felt from the Whitmores and the uncertainty about his future were making him increasingly anxious. With each passing day, the anonymous messages intensified in frequency and severity. He began to fear for his safety and the safety of his friends. The idea that he could be the target of a conspiracy left him restless, and the feeling that something much larger was at stake paralyzed him. That morning, while walking to work, Jake spotted a poster plastered on a pole. It was a call to a community meeting to discuss the future of the community center. But the tone of the announcement was alarming. The words echoed in his mind. He knew the community needed unity, but that unity was being threatened. What could happen if he joined them? What would it mean for the town? When he arrived at Tom's diner, the atmosphere felt different. Customers were whispering about the upcoming meeting, their expressions revealing concern and distrust. Jake sat down at a table and ordered a coffee, but his mind was elsewhere. He felt the eyes of others on him, and he felt like an intruder in his own town. Tom looked at him sincerely and asked, "Jake, you're going to the meeting, right? People need you." The pressure was mounting. He knew he should be there, but what could he do? The internal conflict consumed him. That night, as he prepared for the meeting, Jake had a moment of reflection. He looked in the mirror and questioned who he was. The man he saw reflected was a stranger. Ambition and doubt were shaping his identity in ways he had never imagined. He remembered his childhood, the dreams he had, and the promises he made to himself. Life in Riverwood had always been about community, love, and support, and now it seemed all of that was at risk. He didn't want to be the man who sold his soul for power or money. Arriving at the meeting, the room was packed. Voices mingled in a sea of opinions, and Jake sensed the tension was high. He hesitated at the door, listening to his neighbors' concerns. If the Whitmores get involved, it will be the end of our town. They just want to control us. The words cut like knives, and Jake felt the weight of responsibility grow on his shoulders. When he finally stood up to speak, the words didn't come out as he had hoped. "I just want what's best for all of us." His voice faltered, and the room fell silent. He felt the pressure of all eyes on him. Insecurity overwhelmed him, and he realized he didn't have a clear answer. What was he doing there? What was the best for everyone? He felt lost. Frustration and despair began to mix, and he finally shouted, "I don't know what to do." Those words echoed through the room, and the murmurs intensified. He saw the disappointed looks on his friends' faces, and it hit him like a punch to the gut. He felt vulnerable and distressed, and a wave of shame washed over him. How could he fail so miserably? He stepped away from the table, breathing heavily, his heart weighing like an anchor. That night, Jake walked through the deserted streets of Riverwood, trying to process everything that had happened. The lights in the houses were on, and he could hear laughter and conversation, but everything felt distant. Loneliness enveloped him, and he remembered Tom and Sarah's words, the promises of friendship and support. But on the other hand, the pressure from the Whitmores and the need to make a choice were creating fissures in his relationships. The next morning, he decided he needed to take action. He couldn't let himself be defeated. Jake sought out Sarah, who was organizing an event in the community. He found her amidst balloons and streamers, a picture of determination. "Sarah, I need your help. The town needs to unite, but I don't know how to make that happen." Her gaze was understanding, but there was evident concern. "Jake, you need to be honest with people. They need to know what's at stake. If you don't act now, you could lose their trust forever." Sarah's words resonated in his mind. He knew he was at a crossroads and needed to take action. But what would that mean? Jake began to work on a plan. He would organize a community event, a safe space for everyone to discuss their concerns and ideas. He wanted to restore trust, but he also needed to confront the Whitmores head-on. A few days before the event, he started receiving more direct threats. A note found on his doorstep read, "Be careful with what you're doing. You can't fight against those in control." Fear settled in his heart, but Jake knew he couldn't back down. He remembered Tom's words about being the light of the community. If he backed down now, what would that mean for Riverwood? He couldn't let himself be intimidated. On the day of the event, Jake was nervous. People began to gather, and he felt a mix of anxiety and hope. He climbed onto the makeshift stage and looked at the crowd. "Thank you for being here. I know things are tough, but we need to come together. We can't let fear divide us." The room was silent, and he felt the need to be vulnerable. "I'm afraid too. Afraid of losing everything we've built together. But together, we are stronger." As he spoke, he saw familiar faces nodding in agreement. "Let's support each other. Let's listen to each other. We can't let outside interests divide us." What started as a whisper transformed into applause. He felt a wave of hope and determination. The community was starting to unite again, and that gave Jake the courage he needed. From that moment on, he knew the path would be difficult. The tensions with the Whitmores wouldn't disappear easily, and he would still have to face the consequences of his decisions. But for the first time in a long while, Jake felt he was on the right track. He realized that true strength came from vulnerability and authenticity, and even though challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them, not just for himself, but for Riverwood and for everyone who believed in him. The crowd was restless. Jake climbed onto the makeshift stage, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the tension in the air, a mix of hope and fear. The voices that had once whispered in the streets were now becoming a roar of uncertainty. Looking at the familiar faces gathered before him, he felt small and vulnerable, as if the weight of his words could change the fate of Riverwood. He took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice trembling at first. "Thank you for being here. I know things are tough, but we need to come together. We cannot let fear drive us apart." The words came out with difficulty, as if he were trying to climb a steep mountain. He felt the heavy gazes upon him, as if everyone expected him to be the answer to their anxieties and hopes. As he spoke, Jake began to remember the moments when he felt lost, the times he hesitated and failed. He thought of the anonymous messages, the threats that were becoming more frequent and direct. Insecurity consumed him. He had distanced himself from the people he loved, focusing only on his own struggle. And now, here he was, trying to unite the community, yet still feeling so isolated. "I am afraid too. Afraid of losing everything we have built together," he confessed, his voice faltering. A heavy silence fell over the room. He saw familiar faces contorting with worry, and shame hit him like a punch. How could he guide them if he couldn't even find his own way? But then he remembered Sarah, Tom, and all those who stood by his side. He saw their determination, their willingness to fight for Riverwood. That vision sparked a flicker of courage within him. But together, we are stronger. Jake began to talk about the importance of unity, the strength that could come from togetherness. He mentioned the stories of resilience he knew, how the community had risen in difficult times in the past. He spoke about the value of listening to one another, respecting differences, and finding a common path. What started as a whisper transformed into a call for change. People began to applaud, and he felt the energy in the room shift. There was hope, a renewed sense of purpose. However, even as the crowd responded positively, Jake couldn't ignore the shadow looming over him. He remembered the threats, the feeling that the Whitmores were always lurking, ready to dismantle what he was trying to build. The fight would not be easy, and he could lose everything again. He began to question whether the unity he sought was merely a distant dream. What if he failed again? What would happen to those who believed in him? As he spoke, his emotions began to show. He saw the pain and despair on the faces of his neighbors, and it made his heart ache. He realized it was not just about him, but about all those who had invested their hopes and dreams in Riverwood. The weight of responsibility grew, and he fought against the tears that threatened to escape. "If we do not take action now, we may lose everything we have," he said, his voice stronger now. "We need to fight for what is ours. We cannot let fear dominate us. Together, we can find a way to confront the Whitmores and protect our town." The clamor in the room grew louder, and Jake felt a wave of determination coursing through his veins. Yet, at the back of his mind, doubt still lingered. He knew he couldn't do it alone. And as he looked out at the crowd, Jake realized that his true strength lay in vulnerability and honesty. He needed to open up to others, to be transparent about his doubts and fears. He understood that true leadership was not just about having answers, but about being able to connect with people on a deeper level. As the night wore on, Jake felt rejuvenated. He had done more than just speak. He had created a space for others to express themselves too. Voices began to rise, sharing stories of struggle and resilience. He saw people coming together, forming bonds and alliances that had once seemed impossible. The room was filled with energy and hope, and Jake recognized that the true strength of the community was not just in one person, but in the unity of all. However, Jake's newfound determination also brought with it the reality that he still had a long way to go. He would have to confront the Whitmores, deal with the threats, and find a way to keep the community united. The battle was just beginning, and he felt the weight of responsibility once again. But looking at the hopeful faces around him, he realized he was not alone. Jake remembered an important lesson. True success was not measured by individual achievements, but by the ability to inspire others and create a lasting impact on the lives of those around him. He was ready to embrace this new vision, to become a leader who not only sought victory, but also nurtured unity and trust among all. The event had changed everything for him. He was no longer the man who felt lost and alone, but someone willing to fight for Riverwood and for those he loved. It was a new beginning, and he was ready to face whatever lay ahead. Jake stepped down from the makeshift stage with his heart still racing. The crowd's response filled him with a fleeting happiness, but the euphoria quickly faded, giving way to a whirlwind of doubts. Deep down, he knew that words alone were not enough to face the reality awaiting him. The Whitmore threats loomed like a constant shadow, and now more than ever, he felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He had ignited a spark of hope, but how could he ensure that this flame wouldn't extinguish in the face of adversity? As he walked down the lantern-lit street, Jake reflected on what he had said. He remembered his trembling voice, the vulnerability he had exposed. For him, it was a new beginning, but his mind was filled with uncertainties. What would happen if the unity he had awakened wasn't enough? And what if he failed again, as he had so many times before? These thoughts tormented him, and he felt a growing anguish. That night, Jake decided to meet with Sarah, his longtime friend, and one of the people who had always supported him. He knew he needed someone who could understand him. Sitting on a park bench under the soft moonlight, he began to vent. You saw how people reacted? They were so excited, but what if I can't lead them? What if this all ends in disaster? His voice trembled, and he felt exposed, as if he were revealing his weaknesses. Sarah looked into his eyes and smiled. Jake, you don't need to have all the answers. What matters is that you cared enough to speak. You gave them hope. But more importantly, you created a space for them to speak and come together as well. That's a start. Her words were a balm, but the insecurity still tied a knot in his stomach. But what about the threats? What if the Whitmore decide to act now? The last thing I want is to put people in danger because of my impulsive decisions. He felt the pressure building in his chest, the anxiety transforming into an almost unbearable weight. You're not responsible for all the decisions, Jake. No one expects you to solve everything on your own. We're all here and we need to support each other. If the Whitmore come, we'll face it together. Sarah's confidence in her words was comforting, but doubt still echoed in Jake's mind. In the days that followed, Jake watched the community come together in ways he hadn't expected. Meetings began to happen, and people started organizing into groups to discuss how they could face the challenges ahead. But at the same time, he felt increasingly distant. The weight of responsibility and his own insecurities isolated him. He began to wonder if he was truly making a difference or merely postponing the inevitable fall. During one of these gatherings, Jake realized the impact his words had had. He saw Tom, a neighbor who had always been reclusive, standing up and speaking about his fears and hopes. It was a powerful transformation, and Jake felt a wave of emotion. But at the same time, he questioned whether he was truly empowering people or just creating a facade of hope that could crumble at any moment. One afternoon, while walking through Riverwood, Jake encountered a group of children playing. They were laughing, exploring the nature around them, completely oblivious to the tensions that permeated the town. He stopped to watch them and felt a wave of nostalgia. He remembered when he was a child, when life was simple and problems seemed distant. Their smiles made him realize that the fight was not just for him or the adults, but for a better future for everyone, especially those children. This gave him a new surge of energy. That night, he had a dream. He was back on stage, but this time he wasn't alone. The crowd wasn't just an anonymous mass. He saw familiar faces, friends, and even strangers who had become allies. They were all together, not just listening but also standing up, sharing their stories, and fighting side by side. When he woke up, he felt a renewed determination. It was time to act, not just as a leader, but as part of a community. Jake decided he needed to open up more, not just to Sarah, but to everyone. He organized a new meeting, but this time He made sure to start with a conversation about his own vulnerabilities. He shared his insecurities, the memories of past failures, and the pressure he felt. In doing so, he saw the expressions on the faces around him change. People began to identify with him, sharing their own struggles. The atmosphere filled with empathy and solidarity. And for the first time, Jake didn't feel so alone. Among those who stood up was Tom, who spoke about his experiences with fear and doubt. "I'm scared too, Jake. But when I see everyone here, I feel like I'm not alone. If you can open up, then I can too." That connection brought a new sense to Jake's struggle. He realized that true strength wasn't about being perfect or having all the answers, but about being authentic and creating a safe space for others to express themselves. As the community united, Jake began to see that the fight against the Whitmore wasn't just an external battle, but also an internal journey. He needed to confront his own flaws and insecurities. Day by day, he became more aware that success wasn't just about winning a battle, but cultivating meaningful relationships and building a solid foundation of mutual support. Jake finally understood that true leadership was an act of vulnerability, and that by opening up to others, he not only strengthened himself, but also empowered those around him. He was ready to face whatever lay ahead, not as a solitary leader, but as part of a united and resilient community. Jake stepped down from the makeshift stage with his heart still racing. The crowd's response filled him with a momentary happiness, but the euphoria soon faded, giving way to a whirlwind of doubts. Deep down, he knew that words alone were not enough to face the reality that awaited him. The Whitmore threats loomed like a constant shadow, and now, more than ever, he felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He had sparked a flame of hope, but how could he ensure that flame wouldn't extinguish in the face of adversity? As he walked down the lantern-lit street, Jake reflected on what he had said. He remembered his trembling voice, the vulnerability he had exposed. For him, it was a new beginning, but his mind was filled with uncertainties. What if the unity he had awakened wasn't enough? What if he failed again as he had so many times before? These thoughts tormented him, and he felt a growing anguish. That night, Jake decided to meet Sarah, his longtime friend, and one of the people who had always supported him. He knew he needed someone who could understand him. Sitting on a park bench under the soft moonlight, he began to pour out his heart. You saw how people reacted. They were so excited, but what if I can't lead them? What if this all ends in disaster? His voice trembled, and he felt exposed, as if revealing his weaknesses. Sarah looked into his eyes and smiled. Jake, you don't need to have all the answers. What matters is that you cared enough to speak up. You gave them hope. But more importantly, you created a space for them to speak and unite as well. That's a beginning. Her words were a balm, but insecurity still tightened a knot in his stomach. But what about the threats? What if the Whitmores decide to act now? The last thing I want is to put people in danger because of my impulsive decisions. He felt the pressure rising in his chest, anxiety transforming into an almost unbearable weight. You're not responsible for all the decisions, Jake. No one expects you to solve everything alone. We're all here, and we need to support each other. If the Whitmores come, and we'll face it together. Sarah's confidence in her words was comforting, but doubt still echoed in Jake's mind. In the days that followed, Jake watched the community come together in ways he hadn't expected. Meetings began to happen, and people started organizing into groups to discuss how they could face the challenges ahead. But at the same time, he felt increasingly distant. The weight of responsibility and his own insecurities isolated him. He began to wonder if he was truly making a difference or merely postponing the inevitable downfall. During one of those meetings, Jake realized the impact his words had made. He saw Tom, a neighbor who had always been reclusive, stand up and talk about his fears and hopes. It was a powerful transformation, and Jake felt a wave of emotion. But at the same time, he questioned whether he was truly empowering people or just creating a facade of hope that could crumble at any moment. One afternoon, while walking through Riverwood, Jake came across a group of children playing. They were laughing, exploring the nature around them, completely oblivious to the tensions permeating the town. He stopped to watch them and felt a wave of nostalgia. He remembered when he was a child, when life was simple and problems seemed distant. Their smiles made him realize that the fight wasn't just for him or the adults, but for a better future for everyone, especially those kids. This gave him a new boost. That night, he had a dream. He was back on stage, but this time he wasn't alone. The crowd was not just an anonymous mass. He saw familiar faces, friends, and even strangers who had become allies. They were all together, not just listening, but also standing up, sharing their stories and fighting side by side. When he awoke, he felt a new determination. It was time to act, not just as a leader, but as part of a community. Jake decided he needed to open up more, not just to Sarah, but to everyone. He organized a new meeting, but this time, he made sure to start with a conversation about his own vulnerabilities. He shared his insecurities, memories of past failures, and the pressure he felt. In doing so, he saw the expressions on the faces around him change. People began to identify with him, sharing their own struggles. The atmosphere filled with empathy and solidarity, and for the first time, Jake didn't feel so alone. Among those who stood up was Tom, who spoke about his experiences with fear and doubt. "I'm afraid too, Jake. But when I see everyone here, I feel like I'm not alone. If you can open up, then I can too." That connection brought a new meaning to Jake's fight. He realized that true strength didn't lie in being perfect or having all the answers, but in being authentic and creating a safe space for others to express themselves. As the community came together, Jake began to understand that the fight against the Whitmores was not just an external battle, but also an internal journey. He needed to confront his own flaws and insecurities. With each passing day, he became more aware that success wasn't just about winning a battle, but about cultivating meaningful relationships and building a solid foundation of mutual support. Jake finally understood that true leadership was an act of vulnerability, and that by opening up to others, he not only strengthened himself, but also those around him. He was ready to face whatever came next, not as a solitary leader, but as part of a united and resilient community. The small step of opening up and trusting his group transformed his fear into a sense of belonging and purpose. Jake was no longer alone. He had allies, friends, and a community willing to fight alongside him. And that, for him, was true success. The approaching night brought with it a palpable tension. The air was heavy, and Jake could feel the restlessness of the community around him. He had called for an extraordinary meeting, a crucial moment to discuss the strategy for confronting the Whitmores, who had intensified their threats. As he entered the community hall, he was met with familiar faces, but also with expressions of fear and insecurity. The weight of responsibility he felt was almost unbearable, and doubt tightened around his heart. As people settled in, Jake took a deep breath, trying to gather his courage. He could see Tom, Sarah, and many others who, like him, carried their own emotional burdens. But this was a chance to transform the collective anxiety into strength. When he began to speak, his voice trembled slightly. "We are here because we believe that together we are stronger. But the truth is, I feel fear. Fear of what may happen. Fear of failing again." His words echoed in the hall, and a murmur of agreement spread. He saw Tom's gaze, who also seemed to be fighting his own insecurities. Tension grew, and Jake felt he needed to go further. "I have failed before. I couldn't protect the people I loved, and this uncertainty consumes me. But I cannot let it paralyze me. I cannot let fear win. We need to unite. We need to be the change we want to see." The atmosphere began to shift. People started to stand up, one by one, sharing their fears and hopes. The stories intertwined, creating a fabric of solidarity and empathy. Sarah spoke about her concerns, and others joined in, revealing their vulnerabilities. However, even as the connection strengthened, Jake felt the shadow of the Whitmores looming over them. In the middle of the meeting, the door swung open abruptly, and a burly man entered, his imposing presence silencing everyone. He was one of the Whitmore's goons, and his expression was one of disdain. "What are you doing here? Are you preparing for defeat?" The tension in the air escalated, and Jake felt his stomach churn. "We are here to unite," he shouted, louder than he expected. "We are here to fight for what is right." His voice echoed through the hall, but doubt still lingered in his heart. The man shot a look of contempt, but the crowd began to murmur, growing more confident. The goon advanced, and the room fell silent. Jake felt adrenaline rushing through his veins. He could retreat, let fear take over, or he could face the situation. He remembered the light he had seen in the children's eyes earlier, the hope that had awakened in the community. If you are here to intimidate, know that we are no longer afraid. We are together, and we will not give up. The words came out like a battle cry, and something within him ignited. He was not alone. There was a collective strength there, something the Whitmores could not break. The goon hesitated, and Jake realized he was at a turning point. He was not just fighting for himself, but for everyone around him. The room pulsed with energy, and he saw determined faces, ready to rise. But the tension did not dissipate. The goon looked at Jake and, with a sarcastic smile, issued a threat. "Is that what you think? I hope you are prepared for the consequences." He left, leaving a trail of uncertainty. The mood in the hall changed instantly. Fear returned, and Jake felt the pressure mount. "They are going to attack us," someone whispered, and concerns began to spread like wildfire. Jake knew he needed to act. "We need to prepare. We cannot allow fear to paralyze us. If they come, we need to be ready to fight together." He looked at each of them, searching for the determination that had begun to blossom. "Let's organize and show that we are stronger than they think." In that moment, Jake understood that it was not just about fighting the Whitmores, but about building a support network, a bond that united them. He proposed that everyone contribute their skills. Some could help plan the community's defense, while others would focus on informing and uniting more people. With each word, he felt the energy intensify and determination began to replace fear. The meeting transformed into a plan of action. Everyone stood up, united by a cause, and Jake felt the weight on his shoulders dissipate. He finally realized that true leadership was not about having all the answers, but about being vulnerable and allowing others to come together. It was a collective journey, and together they were stronger. That night, as he walked home, Jake looked up at the starry sky and felt a sense of inner peace. He had confronted his fears, and even in the face of uncertainty, he chose to fight. There were no guarantees of victory, but there was a new strength within him. He was ready to face whatever came, no longer as a solitary leader, but as part of a united community, willing to fight for a better tomorrow. The flame of hope was lit, and together, they could weather any storm. Life in the community began to transform after the tumultuous meeting. Jake realized that unity was not just an abstract idea, it was a tangible force that could shape their future. In the days that followed, he and the others dedicated themselves to working together, each contributing their unique skills. The atmosphere that had once been marked by fear was now filled with a renewed sense of purpose. Jake spent his mornings organizing work groups. Tom led a team responsible for reinforcing the defenses around the community. Sarah, always attentive to the emotional needs of others, began organizing meetings for people to vent and share their concerns. Jake watched gratefully as emotional wounds began to heal, as people opened up and supported one another. As preparations advanced, Jake allowed himself to reflect on what he had learned so far. He remembered the nights when he felt isolated and powerless, carrying the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Now, looking at the determined faces of his neighbors, he understood that true strength did not lie in leading alone, but in allowing others to rise beside him. He had overcome his limitations, and this gave him a new perspective on what it meant to be a leader. However, the consequences of the Whitmore threat still loomed over them. Tension escalated when rumors of an imminent attack began to circulate. Jake felt a knot in his stomach, remembering what had happened during his last attempt to protect the community. He knew the fight would not be easy, but the decision not to let fear dominate them remained firm in his mind. One night, while walking through the community, Jake found Sarah sitting on a bench, gazing at the stars. He joined her, and for a moment, silence enveloped them. He asked if she thought they were ready, his insecurity still evident in his voice. "Jake, we have always been stronger together. Remember what we've built. It's not just about facing the Whitmores, it's about who we are as a community. And that is powerful," she replied, with a glimmer of determination in her eyes. Those words resonated deeply with Jake. He realized that true victory was not just about defeating the Whitmores, but about the transformation that had already occurred within them. They were more united than ever, and that was a triumph in itself. The night of the attack arrived, and the community was prepared. When the Whitmores finally appeared, Jake felt a wave of nervousness, but also a confidence he had never experienced before. He saw Tom and Sarah by his side, ready to fight. The confrontation was intense, but the community's determination stood out. They were not alone. Each fought for the other, and that made all the difference. After the battle, the community emerged wounded but triumphant. The Whitmores were repelled, and the sense of relief was immediate. Jake realized at that moment that physical wounds could heal, but the true transformation had already occurred in their hearts. He had learned the importance of unity, friendship, and resilience. As weeks passed, life began to return to normal. But Jake knew nothing would be as it was before. The experience had changed everyone. People were more supportive, and the bonds between them grew deeper. Jake began to see the beauty in small daily interactions, like a child's smile or a friend's laughter. He learned that true success was not in material achievements, but in the connections formed between people. The lessons learned throughout the journey became part of who he was. Jake began to act with a new mindset, valuing every moment and understanding that life is made of ups and downs. He became an example for his community, showing that vulnerability was not weakness, but a way to strengthen human ties. The friendships formed during that difficult time became unbreakable. Jake and Tom, who had once been mere acquaintances, were now close friends, sharing laughter and concerns. Sarah, with her welcoming nature, became a confidant, always ready to listen and support. Jake looked to the future with hope. The fight against the Whitmores had been only a part of his journey. What truly mattered were the people around him, the strength they found together, and the courage they learned to cultivate. He knew that life would continue to present challenges, but now he was prepared to face them, no longer alone but with a united community by his side. Thus, as he watched the sunset on a quiet afternoon, Jake felt the peace that had previously eluded him. He had found not only a purpose but a home in the heart of the community. And more importantly, he had learned that the true struggle is the one we fight together, where every step taken is a step toward a better tomorrow. Jake looked out the window of his home, observing the calm movement of the community. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and he felt a wave of gratitude. The journey he had experienced had transformed him in ways he could never have imagined. He remembered his days of loneliness and insecurity, when the idea of leading anything seemed like an impossible task. Now, however, he found himself surrounded by people who had become more than just neighbors. They were friends, allies, and above all, family. The Whitmore attack had been a turning point, not only because they had repelled the threat, but because that event had united the community in a way that Jake had never thought possible. Those weeks of preparation and struggle not only strengthened their physical defenses but also cemented deep emotional bonds. Each person had contributed, each voice had been heard, and that made all the difference. Jake reflected on how he had overcome his limitations. Before, he felt trapped by fear and doubt, unable to make decisions that affected the well-being of others. Now, he looked back and saw a different man. He had learned that his strength did not lie in fighting alone, but in opening up to others and allowing them to contribute. He had become a more inclusive leader, valuing everyone's opinions and skills. The lessons life had taught him were now part of his daily routine. He spent his days organizing community activities, always encouraging collaboration and mutual support. The joy of seeing children playing together, adults sharing laughter, and the deep conversations that arose during family nights were proof that true wealth lay not in material possessions, but in human connections. Jake realized that success was not measured in goods but in love and solidarity. In his conversations with Sarah and Tom, he often reflected on how that unexpected friendship had changed his perspective. He had learned to appreciate the little things, like a warm hug or a word of encouragement. These interactions, which had once gone unnoticed, now brought new meaning to his life. Jake had become an example to others, showing that vulnerability was a bridge to strength. Time passed and the community thrived. They began organizing festivals, where everyone gathered to celebrate life together. The physical wounds from the battle had healed, but the emotional scars became marks of a shared journey. Jake saw that by facing challenges, they not only survived, but also thrived. They had become a symbol of resilience and unity, a community that would not be easily shaken. In moments of quiet, Jake reflected on the wisdom he had gained. He understood that life was made up of ups and downs, and that each challenge brought with it an opportunity for growth. Instead of fearing the unknown, he now embraced it, knowing that he would always have the community by his side. This new mindset not only changed the way he viewed the world, but also influenced the decisions he made from then on. The epilogue of his story was not just a happy ending, but a continuous learning process. Jake knew that the journey was far from over. He continued to evolve, learning from his failures and rising again after each fall. The difficulties that arose after the battle were faced with courage and determination, as he had surrounded himself with people who supported him unconditionally. The life lessons he absorbed became guides for his daily actions. He learned to value empathy, listening, and solidarity, principles that now governed his interactions. The sense of peace he felt when helping others was a reflection of the love he had received. Jake was in harmony with himself and the world around him, living a life full of meaning. The friendship that had blossomed between him, Sarah, and Tom was a testament to the lasting impact that unity could have. They became inseparable, always ready to face new challenges together. This friendship was a constant reminder that even in the darkest hours, there would always be light in the form of support and love. Jake smiled as he thought about everything he had lived through. He knew that the future still held challenges, but he was prepared. With the community by his side, he was certain they could face any adversity. He had found not just a purpose but a home, and that gave him the strength needed to keep fighting for a better tomorrow. The true transformation, he realized, was the one that occurred within each of them, individually and collectively. And that was the greatest achievement of all. Jake observed the community around him, now vibrant and full of life, and felt a wave of gratitude. He had been through so much since the Whitmore attack. That experience had not only transformed him, but also shaped the bonds that united each of the residents. The conversations that were once superficial were now deep, filled with support and understanding. He remembered moments when he felt fear, loneliness, and insecurity, but all of that now seemed so distant. "Do you remember how it all started?" Sarah asked as they walked through the park, now a space filled with laughter and play. "It was just you, alone in your house, not knowing what to do." Jake smiled upon hearing that. "It was a tough time, wasn't it? I never imagined I could be a leader. What surprises me the most is how everyone came together. I never thought I could count on so many people." Tom, who had joined them, added, "I think true strength comes from our vulnerability. You showed us that it's important to ask for help and that we don't have to carry the weight alone." "Yes," Jake agreed, looking at the two of them. "I learned that true leadership isn't about having all the answers, but about listening and valuing everyone around us. The strength of our community is what keeps us strong." As they spoke, Jake reflected on how their friendship had grown. The connection he had with Sarah and Tom was special. They faced challenges together, and each difficulty overcome had further strengthened their bond. He remembered nights when they gathered to discuss plans, share fears, and dreams. Those moments became fundamental to his growth. "What else have you learned along this journey?" Sarah asked, a curious sparkle in her eyes. "I learned that true success is not measured by material wealth, but by the connections we make. What matters is the love and solidarity we share. When I looked at the community during the festival, I realized we were one big family. This is a wealth that no money can buy." Jake felt a wave of emotion as he recalled the festival. The laughter, the music, and the joy that filled the air were proof that they had found a new meaning in life. He knew the emotional scars from the battle were still there, but now they were marks of a journey, not of a defeat. "And what about the future?" Tom asked. "What do you hope for?" "I hope to keep learning and growing. I know new challenges will arise, but I am ready. I believe that together, we can face any adversity. What makes me more optimistic is that now we have each other, and that makes all the difference." As they spoke, the light of the sunset began to fade, and a sense of peace filled the air. Jake realized that, although the journey was still ongoing, he had found his place in the world. He had a family, a community, and a new perspective on life. "Let's always remember that we can count on each other," Jake said with a confident smile, "and that our strength comes from unity. This is something we should never forget." The conversation left them reflecting on how much they had grown. The lessons they learned became part of who they were. Jake understood that every mistake, every moment of weakness, had taught him something valuable. He learned the importance of empathy, listening, and solidarity, and these lessons would shape his future. As night fell, Jake looked at his friends, feeling a deep gratitude for having them in his life. He knew that true transformation was not only in his journey but in the collective journey they all shared. Each of them had contributed in some way, and that was something that could never be forgotten. Jake's story was a reminder that we all have our battles and challenges. What really matters is how we face these difficulties and the lessons we take from them. He invited everyone to reflect on their own experiences and how human connections can transform our lives. "Let's keep sharing our stories," he said, "because each of us has something to teach. And together, we can create a future full of hope and love." And so, Jake realized that true achievement was not just overcoming his fears, but the wisdom gained along the way. He was ready for whatever came next, knowing he would always have his community by his side. Life would continue to present challenges, but now he knew that strength lay in unity and friendship. May this journey of learning never come to an end. What moment in this story touched you the most or left you speechless? We really want to hear your opinion, so leave your comment below and share your thoughts with us. Your engagement is essential for us to keep bringing impactful stories like this one. If you know someone who would be fascinated by this story, share the video with them. Let's spread stories that inspire and touch hearts. And if you want to follow more emotional, life-filled narratives, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give it a like. It means a lot to us. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.